So listen to this. David Silva's transfer to Man City was never supposed to happen. You see, in 2008, back when Sheikh Mansour bought the club, the first order of business was to buy David Silva and David Villa. With Valencia heading straight towards bankruptcy, they believed they could just extort them for their two best players. But instead, they got quoted for £135 million, enough to break the world transfer record twice. As Valencia's president Manuel Llorente told the press, "I'd rather go around the stands of the Mestalla begging for donations than to sell David Silva." Yet, unfortunately for him, money always wins. So, while Sheikh Mansour went on a shopping spree that saw him spend £500 million over the following 2 years, paying up for one release clause after the other, by the end of it all, Valencia was making the news for not even being able to pay for the players they already owned. So, they had to do what they had to do. They offered David Silva to Real Madrid and Barcelona. And, of course, with Silva being dropped from the Spanish national team in the opening game of that summer's World Cup, only to watch his teammates win it all, Florentino took that opportunity to lowball them, forcing them to accept a bid of just €35 million. Yet, even then, Real Madrid ended up backing out of the deal, with some insider advising Florentino that David Silva did not carry himself with the dignity required for Real Madrid, accusing him of being a drunk. Yeah. As the man himself would say once he came out to defend his own name, perhaps someone really wanted to make sure that transfer never happened. Well, I'll let you take your own conclusions, but thanks to that moment, a few weeks later, Valencia were forced to go to Manchester City with their tails between their legs and sell them David Silva for just £24 million. As he would say it himself, why did I leave Valencia? Because the club needed me to. Otherwise, I would have never left. That whole move made such little sense for a player like David Silva that Guardiola himself eventually admitted that he thought he had just committed career suicide. At first, it was so quickly disregarded by every pundit in the country that, on his debut, Alan Shearer mistook him for David Villa repeatedly. So often, in fact, that Gary Lineker had to interrupt the transmission to correct him. That's the reality of things. Most people in England barely knew who he was, and nobody really thought his signing would make any impact. I mean, the guy was 5'6" and 140 pounds. There literally could not be a player less suited for the Premier League than him. On that first night, his performance was so embarrassing, a newspaper wrote that he must have spent the whole game wondering if he'd ever get a hold of the ball. Yet, as tiny and unprepared as he may have been, there was a reason Luis Aragonés had once claimed that David Silva had the biggest balls in all of Spain. And so, 2 months later, still far from a regular starter, Silva was subbed in an hour into a goalless game against Blackpool, and 90 seconds later he had assisted Tevez for the opener. But that is not why I'm talking about it. Nor is it for his involvement in their second goal once Blackpool had tied it all up again. No, it's the fact that up till that game, he had often been ridiculed for his constant dispossessions, as pundits believed his skills were useless in a country where defenders would simply bully him out of the ball. But then, he grabbed onto it, lined up for a shot, dummied one defender, did it all again to a second one, and once the third thought he'd dummy him too, he put it into the far post. It was one of the greatest goals in Premier League history. It was David Silva's first goal in the Premier League. Only 2 weeks later, he had been named Man City's Player of the Month. In fact, by the end of November, he had taken the award twice in a row, something that had only ever happened once in the club's history. And still, he went and won it in December to make it 3 consecutive wins. I repeat, on basically his first try, he had broken the club's all-time record for the most Player of the Month awards won consecutively. I can guarantee you, after that, no one was doubting him anymore, even less, once he closed out the season with 21 goal contributions, setting up the winning goal in the final of the FA Cup to win Man City their first trophy in 35 years, getting Carlos Tevez to declare him as the best signing we've ever made. Though, still, no one could imagine just how quickly he was about to force the whole league to kneel down before him. Look, David Silva's second season started with him surrounded by 3 Wigan players. From that position, he dragged the ball back, lifted it over the first 2, dashed past the third, and played in Agüero to get his assist. That was his second of the day, and 2 months later he was already up to 7 goal contributions in 7 games, as already then the newspapers began questioning whether he was the best player in the country. And well, the answer to that question came in his very next game, the Manchester Derby. With City leading the table for the first time since the foundation of the Premier League, this game meant way more than 3 points. It was their opportunity to make a statement, to take their city rivals, the holding champions, the most successful team in the league's history, and show everyone that they would have to pass them the baton whether they wanted to or not. It was quite literally being advertised as the game of the decade, and it may have been precisely that. 21 minutes into the game, Silva evaded Rooney, then played the 1-2 with Milner and faked the touch to let the ball through to Balotelli, who opened the scoreboard. After that, 38 minutes went by without any changes to the score, but then Silva got the ball next to the sideline, made an absolute mockery of the United players, and left Anderson planted into the ground as Balotelli smacked in a second. From there on out, it was a blur. 9 minutes later, it was 3-0 to City, and though United pulled one back, in the 89th minute Silva played across for Dzeko's goal. 2 minutes later, he put it in between the legs of De Gea himself to make it 5, and 2 minutes after that, he played in what has been called the best pass in Man City's history. 1 second, the ball was in City's box, then 2 touches, and Dzeko was through on goal. 6-1 to Man City away at Old Trafford, and David Silva had been all over 5 of those 6 goals. It was such an outstanding performance that when they asked United legend Andy Cole what he thought, even he could only say that he was a joy to watch. Forget man of the match, that performance was listed by The Athletic as one of the 5 best in the history of the Premier League. However, if that game cemented Man City as the strongest team in the country, it did not guarantee them the league title. 6 months later, as they met Man United again, City had fallen down to second place, 3 points below them. In other words, their rivals had now their own chance to put them back in their place, but guess what happened again? 1 corner from David Silva and suddenly the 2 teams were leveled going into the final game of the season, and you know the story. With both kickoffs at the same time, the 2 games went into injury time with United in front and City 2-1 behind against Queen's Park Rangers. As things stood, the title would end up with United regardless of how humiliated they had been throughout the season. But of course, on the 92nd minute, having already been involved in the first goal, another corner from David Silva tied the game, and 2 minutes after that, history had been made. Sure, Agüero had scored the winning goal and his name had become synonym with that title, their first in 44 years, but City's best player that season had been David Silva. Even though, of course, the league ignored him in favor of Vincent Kompany and the PFA in favor of Van Persie, he didn't even get a nomination. Regardless, once back from putting down more goal contributions at the Euros than any other player and winning a 3rd consecutive international tournament with Spain, David Silva's 3rd season wasn't so nice. Desperate to go out with a bang, Sir Alex managed to exorcise Man United's demons one last time, while Mancini put the final nail in his own coffin by losing the final of the FA Cup to Wigan Athletic. But that's where it all happened again. You see, the following year, Pellegrini took over, Yaya Touré had the season of his life, and City won the title again. But that's it. The only thing anyone remembers from that season is Yaya Touré, even if, in the beginning, with David Silva out injured, they didn't stand a chance. Listen, by the 16th match day, with Silva having played only 4 full 90s, City were down in 4th with a win rate of only 60% and no real consistency to them. Yet, then, once he was back, over his next 20 games, they'd only lose twice. If they won that first match against Liverpool, it was because he started a comeback with one of his infamous corners. If they survived once Kompany got sent off against Hull City, it was because he scored an assist to secure that 2-0 win. The same way, he'd be the one to take a point off of Arsenal a couple weeks later. Even as they got defeated by Liverpool in what should have been the title decider, he had first scored twice to bring them back level. I can guarantee you one thing, Yaya Touré could not have beaten that version of Luis Suarez without David Silva, yet it never seemed to matter. By the following season, even with City going through a rough year, Silva somehow managed to score screamer after screamer to hit a career-high 12 league goals, outscoring the likes of Van Persie, Rooney and Sadio Mane. Yet, when it came time to name their Team of the Year, the PFA once again forgot about him. And the next season, with David Silva getting sidelined for 2 months, almost immediately after the Bruyne signing, by the time he came back, it seemed like the fans had already found a new idol, like they were too distracted playing with their shiny new toy in order to remember him. After all, if in his own debut season, David Silva had forced everyone to pay attention by winning back-to-back Player of the Month awards, now, in his 2-month absence, De Bruyne had done the same. And he'd soon be making it 4 in a single season, getting his very own record, and, obviously, being named Player of the Year altogether. But, again, there was a bit of a coincidence there, because that injury kept on sidelining David Silva that whole time. By the end of the season, he had been sidelined 9 different times for a total of 122 days, missing 22 matches. So, as you can imagine, in the league, the result was the expected. De Bruyne or not, without Silva, Man City had their worst performance since his arrival, only qualifying for the Champions League on goal difference. However, speaking of the Champions League, that was a different story. Perhaps quickly realizing that any possible assault on the Premier League title was dead in the water without David Silva, Man City seemed to instead focus on getting him fit for every UCL knockout match, since, after all, everyone knew that was Sheikh Mansour's ultimate goal, and they succeeded. With Silva on the team sheet, Man City went undefeated, home or away, from the last 16 onto the quarters against their billionaire rivals PSG, and finally, they even received Real Madrid at home and held them to a draw to make that, by far, their most successful Champions League campaign ever. But that's exactly where the script got flipped. David Silva went out injured in that game, making that second leg the first game he missed, and their first defeat. In other words, a warning to anyone who thought that he was injured far too often and that age was catching up to him, that no matter how flashy De Bruyne was, Silva was the linchpin keeping their whole operation together. And a certain other Spaniard clearly caught wind of this. When Guardiola arrived the following season and moved him deeper into midfield, you could almost fall for the mistake of thinking he was pulling him back to favor De Bruyne while he looked for some millionaire signing who could finally replace him. But, in reality, he was centering their whole game around him because he knew no other player in the world, let alone in their team, could ever put his philosophy into practice better than him. Guardiola had Xavi, then he had Iniesta, and now he had David Silva. As he said it himself, "I'm a lucky guy." And so, that season, despite City finishing 15 points from the top while Guardiola picked up the pieces Pellegrini had left behind, David Silva was finally named Man City's Player of the Season 7 years after his arrival. And he still wasn't done. In 2017, when he showed up to preseason with a bald head, everyone should have known that he and Guardiola had basically become one. 14 matches later, he was up to 8 assists, the most out of any player in the top 5 leagues. But then, with Man City already 12 points on top of the league table, just as Silva himself scored the winner in the Manchester derby, on his way to his 17th win in a row, his name was suddenly redacted from the squad list for 2 games, without any justification, as, of course, City immediately lost points without him. Still, after weeks of rumors surrounding his absence, David Silva finally came out to the public and revealed his son had been born severely premature and was in the hospital fighting day by day to survive. Regardless, the following game, he was already back on the pitch. In the 21st minute, both home and away fans rose from their seats to applaud him. And for the rest of the season, Silva would travel back and forth between Madrid and Manchester in order to check on his son and come back in time to play on Sunday. But still, through all of that, the outcome of that season was maybe the greatest achievement of his career. 25 consecutive wins across all competitions. That streak was literally the record throughout the whole history of British football, all the way from 1888 when the first ever league was founded. Don't get it wrong, this was no collective achievement. City were still drawing and losing matches, but only when Silva was out taking care of his son. That was no coincidence, as City broke the Premier League's all-time points record, becoming the first ever to reach 100. If you were to split that campaign into 2 sets of matches, the 29 games Silva took part in and the 9 he wasn't available for, both sets would have the same number of draws and defeats. Now imagine what they could have done if he had been available all season. Obviously, it was that year that the PFA finally had to hand him what, believe it or not, was his first ever Player of the Year nomination, even though from the day he first landed in England until then, he had provided 75 assists, 22 more than second place Wayne Rooney, as well as creating 675 chances, 175 more than second place Eden Hazard. Still, if that lack of recognition wasn't enough, with his son having now been nursed back to full health, Silva got within 2 points off of repeating that Centurion season, and the next year, with Kompany departing, even though Silva had also announced he'd be leaving soon, he was handed the captain's armband. However, in what should have been his victory lap, not only was he deprived of much celebration, with the League Cup being their only silverware of the season, but even when he walked out of the Etihad for the final time, he did so without even a crowd to applaud him, as it all happened precisely during the lockdown. But honestly, it didn't matter, and I'm not saying this because now the man has a literal statue outside of the Etihad, but because those who were there to see him play know he is just as responsible as Guardiola for changing English football forever. A man so good, he answered the question of what it would be like if Xavi or Iniesta had gone to England. Or, as Noel Gallagher put it best, so good, I'd let him have sex with my wife.